equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child and sibling loss. This is the Hope After Child and Sibling Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you'll hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. I'm Greg Bufkin, your host and one of the co-founders of the Empty Chair Endeavor. To learn more about us, please visit our website at www.emptychairendeavor.com. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I'm your host, Greg Bufkin. And today, before I introduce my guest, I wanted to take a minute just to say thank you for listening and for sharing these conversations with others. We hope you'll find those conversations encouraging, uplifting, and to be sources of hope. If you think you might like to share your story on a future episode, send me an email with a brief description of your story, as well as your preferred contact information, and you'll find my email address at the end of each episode description. Now, joining me today as a guest is Diane Grotberg. In October of 2016, Diane and her husband Clark lost their precious 19-year-old son David in a hit-and-run accident while he was attending college at Baylor University in Texas. Not until 8 long years later would the trial take place and the driver be found guilty and sentenced. We hope you'll listen as we talk about the impact of David's life and death on the lives of countless other people at Baylor University, in his own community, as well as kids and youth living in orphanages in Guatemala. You'll also learn how Diane's faith in and relationship with Jesus Christ has carried and sustained her on this now 10-year-long journey. And now here's my conversation with Diane. Hey, Diane, welcome to our podcast today. It is so good to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
Well, hey, listen, before we dive into your story, why don't you take a couple of minutes and just tell our listeners a little about you guys personally, where you live and that sort of thing.
Okay, well, my name is Diane Grotberg, and my husband's name is Clark, and we live in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is northwestern Minnesota, kind of right in the middle of the state, but all the way to the west. And we have 6 children. David would have been our oldest. He would have been turning 29 next month, and our youngest is 18. Yeah, we have
your youngest is 18?
Our youngest is 18, a girl. We have 4 girls and 2 boys. Let's see, 3 of them are out of college. My oldest daughter, Mary, has 2 children, and she lives in Fergus Falls. She got her master's in flute performance and then moved back to Fergus Falls with her husband and children. My second daughter, Elizabeth, lives in Wisconsin with her husband and works there. And then Thomas lives in Minneapolis with his wife, and he's an engineer. And then Alexandra, our youngest, is at Baylor University in Texas, and Sarah, our second youngest, is at the University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Wow, you guys are spread out all over creation, aren't you?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, and you have, 2 grandchildren? Is that right?
I have 2 grandsons, just little.
How old are they?
Benjamin is 20 months old, and Oliver is 2 months old.
Wow, congratulations on a brand new one. That's great. I bet you enjoy that role, don't you?
Love it.
Yeah, of course. I've never heard a grandparent say otherwise. I've heard some say that if they had known what having grandchildren was like, they would have skipped over having children and just had the grandchildren.
Exactly. It's just, you get all the fun.
Exactly. All the fun without a lot of the responsibility, right?
Yeah, right.
I appreciate you sharing that. So what I'd like for you to do, you mentioned your son, David, and that's why you're here, is to share your story. Let's go back in time a ways and let's talk about David growing up. Tell our listeners a little bit about him, who he is. I don't know, maybe just a couple of your favorite memories with him.
Wow. David is our oldest. He was born when I was just finishing up my second year of law school. So it was a huge, huge change for us. But David was this curious, active little boy. Just absolutely loved being his parents. When he was in first grade, he was at a little private Christian school, and we decided we needed to bring him home. It wasn't something I really originally wanted to do, but just he was so curious and so active. We thought he would be better off at home. So I began homeschooling him in second grade and did it all the way through 12th grade.
Wow.
And I mean, we had a lot of fun. It was a lot of work because he pushed so hard. His vocabulary was big, better than mine. He's 10 years old using words I had to look up. But it was humbling, but really a beautiful experience. I ended up homeschooling all my kids. I finished homeschooling this last summer. So just a
Wow.
great adventure. And it all started with his curiosity, but he was also a really deeply sensitive person, a very spiritual teenager. When he was 14, he went to Guatemala to work at the House of Hope orphanage just for a week. He went with his dad and the church we were attending at the time. And while he was there, his heart was really touched by the ministry and by those children. And so in that first week, he pressured Clark, his dad, if he could see if he could come that summer. And the leader at the time said, well, we usually take them when they're 18, but we'll take David. So,
Wow.
and it was amazing, not surprising to us, but just amazing that Peter, the leader of House of Hope at the time in Guatemala, would recognize the spiritual leadership and the spiritual giftings that he had. So his 15th year summer, when he was 15, he spent 5 weeks in Guatemala. The next
Wow.
summer, he spent 3 months. And when he was 17, it was another 3 months. And because he was homeschooled, we had a little flexibility with his schedule. So he would earn money, work for his dad in April and May, and then he would be able to afford to spend the summer in Guatemala. And then when he was 18, he wanted to go back. And I said, you really need to earn some money for college. Guatemala's not going anywhere. And so he begrudgingly spent the summer at home with us, the siblings, and earned money for college. And I don't know. It was just really special to know that he had a heart for these orphans and for others. And the other thing that was really challenging and fun about David is he just pushed until he got his own way.
Who
He
did he
was
get that from, you or your husband?
my husband, probably. He was a very sweet-spirited person, but I just remember times my kids did music at the high school in town, but it's 14 miles away, and he was a late driver because he wasn't home in summers, and so he didn't have a driver's license, so he'd wanna go to pep band because he just loved being with people, and I'd say, "It's so far, I'm so tired, I'm not taking you." 15 minutes later, I'm in the car driving him to pep band, and I'm thinking, "How did I get here?" And it was because he could really coax you to do anything. He was in robotics for 2 years, and after the 2 years, he and Clark decided they were gonna start their own robotics team. And I said no because I knew I'd be running a robotics team, and I didn't wanna do.
Right.
In the fall, there we were, having a meeting for our robotics team that was run out of our house. He started the team. It ran for 9 years. We ran it until his younger brother graduated from high school. And
Wow.
yeah, I mean,
9 years?
yeah, and we were a very, very successful team. I mean, he really set us up as a very competitive team. But in robotics, we had to raise quite a bit of money to take some trips and just do some of the things we did. And I remember talking to one of the vice presidents over at Outertel Power, the local power company, and she said, David came in he called her up and asked if he could do a demonstration. And she said, you can, but I have no money for you. And he said, that's fine. I still want to do a demonstration. He walked away with a check. And they became one of our larger sponsors for the rest of the time we ran robotics.
Wow.
That was just David.
That's amazing. Okay, so while you were sharing earlier on, thinking, okay, you shared that you had started out in law school and then you decided somewhere along the way with David that you would do homeschooling.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, which did you find harder, homeschooling or law school?
Homeschooling by far. It was
I knew that's what you were going to say. That's funny. Yeah, I think it's pretty predictable, but rewarding.
Yes, very rewarding.
So I know this is going to probably be a little bit sensitive for you, but I would like for our listeners to know how your grief journey started, Diane. So we need to step back to that time in 2016 when David was a sophomore at Baylor University. And when you and I had spoken on the phone back a few weeks ago, you shared a lot about how well known, how popular David was on campus to just be a sophomore and was not a local guy. You guys live in Minnesota, and here he is down in Baylor University. But in his sophomore year, you guys got a knock on the door one night that represents that knock, that represents that phone call that every parent lives in dreaded fear of when they think about it. Why don't you just pick up there, tell our listeners what happened, and I mean, just what that was like trying to move forward from that knock on the door.
Okay, well, it was about midnight, and my daughter, Mary, she was 16, and her bedroom kind of looks out on that door. She looked out her bedroom, she could see part of our driveway. And she came into our room and said, "Dad, someone's at the door," which is very strange. We live out in the country. We live on just about 10 acres, and we don't really have neighbors. So that was very strange. So Clark went downstairs, and then they asked him where I was. So he came upstairs and said, "They're looking for you." And I'm thinking, I haven't, I'm wondering what I've done. I haven't done
Right.
anything.
Of course.
Yes. So I'm very like relaxed and cheerful and curious. So I get to the door, and there are these two sheriffs standing there. And there's no softening this. When you tell parents their son has died, there's nothing really nice you can say. So they didn't. They just said, "Your son, David Grotberg, is deceased."
That's how they said it?
Yes. And they
Uh,
stood there. They were very kind. They just stood there, and I don't remember. Clark says I screamed. I don't remember that part. I remember thinking my life will never be the same instantly. And then I remember feeling like everything kind of went dark, and it was dark outside. It was dark on our entryway, but I felt like I was falling and thinking, I'm not, this is my life now. I'm going to fall. And God so clearly said to me, "I'm right here. I can catch you if you want me to, but you have to ask." And I thought, okay, I'm asking. I'm not doing this alone. I'm asking. And then it was like God kind of came into our little entryway. And then I remember thinking it was this very strange thing as if you feel in one sense that your life is kind of over, but in another sense, the creator of the universe has just moved in. So it
right.
can't be over. So we kind of were moving into our house with the sheriffs. And I remember saying, "I can't do this." And then God spoke to me and said, "You've been raised your whole life to do this. So now go do this." And I realized that, yes, I have been. My grandfather's a pastor. My dad's a pastor. I've been raised in the church. I went to Bible school. I know what's true and what's not true. And I'm going to have to live it out right now. So we moved into our living room. Our pastor came over. Some friends came over. My husband's brother and his wife, they were about 3 hours away. They started on the road. And it was the strangest feeling. We're sitting in the living room. We're knowing like one of your favorite people in the world, the person that you raised is gone. But in one sense, but God is sitting there right with you and grieving with you and telling you he's not going to leave. And
Right.
so I remember saying, I said, the creator of the universe is weeping with us. How can I be angry when the creator of the universe has moved into my house and sits with us? And then Clark said, "I have never felt so empty and so full at the same time."
Yeah, it's a phenomenon that you absolutely cannot even begin to try to explain to anybody else who hasn't lived it. But that's a good description.
And I felt like the truth of my faith, I guess I wasn't feeling so much as I was being tested, as I was being told, it's time to live this like seriously now. I mean, we've been living this all these years, but now is the time. Do you believe it or don't you believe it? And I realized I believed it. And, I want to make really clear, other people have different experiences. God met me where I was. He spoke to me as who I was. Not everyone's going to share my experience because not everyone has had my upbringing. David was very, very alive in that room, just in the sense that we brought our experience of him with us. And we're
Right.
saying he was so strong in his faith. We can't deny the same faith or reject the same faith that we raised him to believe that he embraced. So we're going to make him proud.
Mm. Well, what a testimony.
And you see, then there's so many, of course, there's so many things that happen right away.
Diane, what I was going to maybe suggest is not that it's that important, but David's death was so needless. I mean, it was the nature of it was so cold and so heinous. And then there was a lot of cover up involved.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't feel like you have to spend a lot of time there, but I think it's important for our listeners to know what happened, because what you've been describing is what happened to you guys after this happened. So just take us back and briefly bring us up to date and what led to that visit that night by the sheriff's office.
Okay, so David and his girlfriend Caitlin had ridden bikes to a movie, and they'd watched a movie. It was some missionary movie, I guess, that they had seen, and they were on their way back on their bikes back to Baylor.
Okay.
At the intersection, they were on Franklin. It's down in the 3000 area of Franklin. I never remember, 3100 or something like that. They were about to actually turn into a parking lot because Caitlin needed a break, and they were going to just look for maybe someplace to take a break. I don't know where they were going to go. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And Tammy Blankenship had been at a party. It was a party with Midway. Midway's the big school, one of the big school districts down in Waco. It was a party of administrators, and she was there, and she was drinking. And it later came out that she was a heavy drinker. She got in her car to leave and drove down Franklin and was speeding based on testimony. And she hit him pretty much, from my understanding, she hit him straight on and didn't even slow down, basically drove right through him. He then went up onto her windshield. He was hit on the head, like back on the head. It cracked his skull around here and severed his spinal cord. So he was gone before he even hit the ground. She drove by. He went over the car. Yeah, and then even in the pictures, no, I haven't seen all the pictures, but there was blood all the way down the road. Yeah, it was a really, really, really violent, devastating crash. His girlfriend, Caitlin, had so much blood on her, they thought she had been injured, which she hadn't been injured. Yeah, and then what happened was Ms. Blankenship then the next day had someone help her hide her car. There's so much dishonesty in what went on, but what we understand happened is she recognized that she had hit somebody. She said she thought she hit a homeless person, saw that a student from Baylor had been killed, so she hid her car about 45 minutes away in a Walmart parking lot. Fortunately, she had received some phone calls during this time, and they were able to track her car and track where she was at the time of the crash. So she was right where he was hit at the time of the crash. She then got her car back. About 3 weeks later, she sent it over to mechanic and used her insurance to get it fixed so that there were photographs of the car. And then she just went on with her life for 2 years.
2 years.
2 years. She, at the time, had two students. One was David's age, one a little older, who were Baylor students. She was at homecoming. They took some of us on the field and gave us David's uniform. They had dedicated David was in marching band, and they dedicated their show to David. And some of us had to return home, but there were two of my daughters that I stayed back. And she was, as far as we understand, she was at that game when they honored our family. Never came forward.
Wow.
And 2 years later, somebody wrote a letter indicating that they knew someone connected to hiding the car, and they needed to talk to the person who helped move the car. And after they did that, then she gave them the name of the person that had hit him.
Wow. And as I recall in our conversation a few weeks ago, you said that because of a lot of, I guess, the typical legal process, the trial didn't actually come up until 2024.
Yes.
Is that correct? Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes. Between COVID and just the slow movement of the county.
Yeah. 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 That's an awful long time. But during the trial, as I understand it, she was convicted, right?
Yes, she was.
And is now serving time.
Yes, she received 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine what it was 8 years before it went to trial, right?
7.5 years.
7.5. Yeah. I simply cannot imagine what you guys went through in that long time period. Probably seemed like a lot longer than 7.5 years.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what your lives were like, particularly in those first few months. And sometimes I've heard a lot of people say that the second year can even be more difficult than the first. People often they only understand what they see on the surface, right, Diane? I mean,
Mhm.
they see the emotions and they know that, I mean, they know what happened, but they don't really realize what goes on internally. They don't realize how it affects marriages and families and really every aspect of life. So, if you don't mind, just share a little of what your lives looked like during that first year or two.
Well, the real struggle, okay, of course, when your kid dies, your brain kind of turns to mush. You live in kind of fog and you think, I don't remember what I've said, where I'm supposed to be, what's going on. But I had 5 children that I was homeschooling. We had a robotics competition. I think the robotics competition was 3 weeks after David was killed. And then my oldest daughter was competing in a concerto competition.
Okay,
So
so 3 weeks after you got a robotics competition and you're homeschooling, you said four
5.
children, five at the same time. So how long a break was there between their studies when you got the news about David and continuing their studies?
I think I took 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks.
That's not
And
very long.
it wasn't, but the problem was I had 2 kids in high school,
Yeah,
and so you've gotta get through the material.
right.
So, everything's kind of a blur, but I'm an action person, like, let's get it done, but your brain's not working. So
Yeah,
yeah, we decided pretty much right away we were gonna do the competition because our 12-year-old Thomas was 12 at the time, and he is just 100% mechanical engineer, and this is so important to him. And then his sister, who was 14, Elizabeth, she's the head of the team. So we're looking around and we know, well, David would want the team to keep going forward. So we're just going to do the best we can.
right.
And I remember we would go out and they would compete. And then I would go in the bathroom and sob. And then I'd go back out. And I think no one would have, like you said, no one would have any clue what's actually going on here. Like,
Yeah,
you're just
yeah,
shutting the part down. You're like, these kids need to have their parents. They can't do this on their own. And I also remember with Mary, we're taking her, she was 16, we're taking her about an hour away for her competition. And you're just like, we just have to do this. These kids, like, this is their life too. A lot of things we didn't do. And I remember getting to the end of that first year, and the girls, I had 2 girls in the same grade, and they were in 10th grade because they were high school sophomores when David was a college sophomore, and thinking, I don't really know what we did. I don't, did we get it done? I got to do transcripts. I don't know if we did. And kind of like having to slow down and look at it and realizing, okay, we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. I think we're going to be okay.
yeah.
And then, of course, it comes about August, September, and that fog lifts. And then you're facing the grief with no fog.
Yeah, that's when it gets very raw.
And I remember, our pastor telling my husband early on, well, you guys seemed fine. Like, there was really
Yeah,
no church outreach after 2 weeks. And my husband was trying to explain that we're devastated. We're you're crying every single day. Your eyes are tired of tears. You don't want to go anywhere because your nose is red. And the pastor is saying, well, you did robotics. We figured you were fine.
Gosh. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Diane. And parents who've lost a child understand what you're saying because they've lived it. We've all lived it in one way, shape, or form. And I remember we didn't go back to church for a couple of months after we lost Ryan. But when we did, we would go purposely late and we would leave slightly early to avoid conversations and uncomfortable avoidance of conversations.
Yes.
But I remember this is probably 2 to 3 months after we lost him that somebody made the comment to some friends of ours that they thought that we were fine because they saw us in church. And we assured the ones who told us this, we're anything but fine. Outward appearances can be so deceiving when you are on your grief journey because we try to hold it together because otherwise we feel like we're living a life of having fallen apart and we don't want it on public display too much. So I say all of that to say I can so readily identify with that. And unfortunately, sometimes those in the church are the ones who seem to disappear pretty quickly, within a week or two after it happens. That's when we really start needing the support is
Right.
once the shock wears off. And then sometimes it's hard to find people, isn't it? And even pastors don't get it.
No, we found out in 2018 that they had found the person who had killed him, but we had left our church just a few months earlier than that because they made it clear that we were unwelcome with our grief and we couldn't get rid of the grief.
Okay, let's just take a step back. They made it plain to you. They didn't know you weren't welcome to bring your grief with you, is what I think I'm hearing. You were welcome to show up as long as you didn't talk about your loss.
Right.
My gosh, that's just unthinkable. Wow.
Right. And trying to communicate that to people turned into you almost become kind of a lab rat. They're just watching you and poking you with a stick in some ways. And my husband I can't take this anymore. Very, very soon after David was killed, one of the pastors came into where he works and said to him, do you wish I would say it was 3 or 4 weeks after David was killed. And he said, do you wish that it had been a different kid who had died instead of David? Because David was just so full of life.
What?
And it was just really hard because you're grieving. Clark he works at a rental store and a bike shop. He manages that. And he would go into his bike shop and sob, come out when customers came and get it together, help the customer, go back into his bike shop. And so one of your pastors is being so incredibly inappropriate. But at the same time, some of these men, these old farmers and, different construction workers are coming in and telling him how sorry they are. They're talking about David. They're coming around Clark and supporting him and being so kind every day that for that first year, someone came in and talked about David to Clark. But it wasn't the church.
That when you need that kind of support, when you need the support of your pastor, you need the support of brothers and sisters in Christ, you would think and hope and pray that they would be the front line of help, the front line of compassion. And you and I both understand we're not making a blanket statement about the church, about the church, the big C church. This is what happened in your church. Yours is not the only church where this has happened because I've talked to too many other guests who have shared similar experiences. It's not a time when people need to come and try to put spiritual Band-Aids on us. A Band-Aid on what is a huge gaping surgical wound. Scripture can be very encouraging. It can be very helpful when it's timed right. But it's not a time to be talking about theology. It's not a time to be telling people how they should or shouldn't feel.
No,
It's
it
a
isn't.
time, yeah. It's about compassion and kindness in your presence. I mean, after all, when Jesus was here and interacting with people, he didn't approach people who were dealing with life and death situations and the darkest places in their lives and spout off theology. He came to them with kindness and compassion and with his presence. And that's what we need to do better.
For sure.
Wow. Well, I'm so sorry that you guys had that experience, but thankful that those other people, just the regular, ordinary people who were in your lives, would come by and offer their presence and just let you know they had not forgotten. I suspect that you guys probably did not stay at that church for very long.
It was a little tricky. Clark left after a year, and we asked for support. They were not interested. Yeah. I stayed longer because my daughter and I were helping with music at the beginning of the service. And so I was trying to kind of stay out my obligation, and she enjoyed it. But at that point, 6 months or so of going without him, and really 2 people asked why he wasn't there in those 6 months. And I said at the end, we were leaving, I said, they don't speak to us at all. I said, Mary, we're the help. We come in, we play music, we leave. No one speaks to us. There's no point in being here. It just became very awkward. People are wondering. We used to come to church with our 6 kids and then 5 kids, and all of a sudden it's just 2 of us, and they're not asking. So, it was just like, well, after a while, you just leave because it's very clear there's no place for you. I will say that after we left, one person did reach out, and there were a few people who had reached out while we were there, but someone did reach out and ask why we left. That was the only person who asked me why I left, but at least that I recall.
So, looking back at that time, what would the support have looked like that you guys craved?
I'll be honest, all I wanted was maybe the pastor to pray with us maybe once a month, maybe talk to us once a month or somebody and just pray with us and ask us how we were. It would have been nice if a woman in the church had called and come over just once or twice. We weren't looking for any sort of huge support group for us. We just wanted to know there was someone we could talk to.
But that didn't happen.
No. And, one time when we brought up, soon after Dave was killed, we brought up something to the pastor. He just got very uncomfortable, raised his hands in the air in front of my 16-year-old daughter and said, no, 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 and walked out of the sanctuary.
Wow.
And then one time we had this prayer group. I wasn't exactly sure who was on it, but I was told, can we have your prayer requests? We would like them to be specific. And at the time, we were going through some things that were deeply personal and very private. And I said, I cannot give you specifics. And she said, well, we really like them. I said, well, I will not. 3 times she pushed me for specifics right in the lobby. And I'm like, specifics, my son is dead. How much more do you need than that? And I just said, I can't do that right now. And I left. And then she went to see my husband. People from the church would go into his work every once in a while and torment him at church and say things inappropriate. And she went in there and she said, well, I tried to get some prayer requests, but your wife was very strange about it.
Wow. You couldn't make this stuff up.
I know. Yeah. I mean, it just became very clear that was not the place for us anymore.
Yeah, you probably stayed a lot longer than I would have. So 6 months later, 7, 8 months later, were you guys able to find another church?
Yeah, that was tough. My kids had moved to a different church and I started going with them. It's very difficult in a small town and people know.
Yeah.
And I go to church with them, but you sit in the sanctuary and you sob in the back and then you leave. You're very uncomfortable. And it just didn't end up being a really good fit for me to do that. It was very hard on me. Clark would not go. He was just so hurt. He wouldn't go. And then I was trying, and then the pastor started engaging me. I remember at one point in a email discussion, and I just tried to pour my heart and say, we're so hurt with how people have treated us. And the response is pretty much, well, the church isn't perfect. No apology. No, we really would like to do better. It was just, and then you get a lot of, well, people don't know what to say. Basically, you make them uncomfortable. So
You feel like you're contagious sometimes, don't you?
well, pretty much. So I ended up, we left that church and started attending a very, very small church, kind of on and off. And that was okay. But my problem was now as I'm no longer homeschooling, I only work casually. I needed to have some sort of community. Just recently, so this has been, David's been dead 9.5 years. So just recently, I started going to church with my oldest daughter. And that's been a very different experience. They've been much more welcoming, but I find myself so cautious.
Defensive.
Yes. And don't know that church is for people like me.
That's, it's to say it is a shame for you to have been made to feel that way is such an understatement. That should be the place that grieving parents should be able to run to into open arms. I get it that people don't get us. I get it that we make people feel uncomfortable. We don't do it on purpose. And I would, and you'd like to ask, well, if we make you feel uncomfortable, can you imagine how uncomfortable we feel having lost our child and are trying to figure out how to do life on the other side of that?
Right.
And I want you to answer this because I want people who are listening who maybe know somebody else who's lost a child, and they're listening because they want to know if there's anything that they can pick up that would be helpful. So if somebody in any of the churches that you've been to were to walk up to you, whether it was 6 months after or here 9.5 years later, and ask you about David by name, would that upset you? Or would you just feel like, oh my gosh, somebody remembers my child and they are kind enough to ask? Which way would you react?
I'd be thrilled. And
of course you would.
It just happened to me when I went to my daughter's church. And I was thinking, I'm gonna get through this time and I'm not gonna have to go through an awkward time. And I'm not gonna say anything about David. I'm just not gonna do it. It'll be fine, then we'll leave. And somebody from my past, I've just known for a long time, but I hadn't seen in a number of years. She walked over, she said, I just wanted to say hello. So happy to have you here. And I thought, oh, well, hello. And then she said, how have you guys been doing since David died? And I thought, of course, the tears well up. But my thought was, that's so kind of you to think of us in that way.
Yes.
And then it opened up the door, which I had not planned on opening, because at the moment I was talking to the pastor and his wife, and I knew them a little bit, and they're just being so kind. But it just opened up the door for that conversation, a little bit awkward, but they didn't make it awkward. And I was able to tell them a little bit, kind of where we were coming from and why I was there without my husband, and it was a really, really different situation. They were open and kind and caring. And it was all because Emily walked over and asked that question.
Wow. Yeah, I remember us talking about that when we talked on the phone a few weeks ago. And I thought, what a stark contrast to how you guys were treated where you were at the church you were in initially when it happened. And here are people who, one from the past, but these others, you don't know all that well. You know who they are, and maybe you've had a conversation with them at some point, but you don't do life with them regularly. And yet, in that moment, they didn't have time to prepare. They didn't have time to think about what they would say, what they wouldn't say, how they would react, but they did it right, simply because they showed kindness and compassion, and they listened to you. And that's it. It's not rocket science. It's just showing up. It's about offering your presence. It's about being willing to listen and just show kindness and compassion, even if you feel uncomfortable. We all feel uncomfortable. Those are not comfortable conversations. It's not a comfortable way to live when you're on your grief journey, particularly in the first few years. We crave people like that because they are the ones who are kind of few and far between. But those are the kind of people that make such an impact. And if that's you today and you're listening because it's somebody you want to know how to help somebody else, please don't be standoffish. Please just be willing to put yourself aside and step into the pain and into the grief with that parent that you know is suffering, like in ways that you cannot even begin to imagine. You have no idea what it'll mean to them. And by all means, please ask them about their child. Just ask them to share a favorite memory. If you have a memory with their child, ask it, would it be okay if I shared this story about David? It's very simple, honestly.
Right. We're not asking for some profound explanation of why God allowed something like this to happen to us. We recognize that answer is not available to us.
Exactly. And it's okay. We don't need that. It doesn't change anything. If God were to answer all those questions about our whys and all that just kind of constantly flows through our minds, all those questions. That's one of the things that he was kind enough to help me understand early on after we lost Ryan. Ryan took his own life, and so that brings up a lot of questions, and you feel guilty, and the list goes on and on and on. And I remember very clearly that God spoke to me and said, even if I gave you all those reasons why, it wouldn't change anything. And if you had those answers, then you would also have to deal with those answers. It wouldn't be so simple as just to know that you had answers, because we all want them. Feel like we have to have answers before we can have closure or before we can have peace. I think God knows us so well and loves us so much that he doesn't always give us those answers, but says, just trust me, give it to me, and I'll give you my peace and I'll give you my comfort.
Exactly. I remember early on kind of having a panic attack and thinking, I'm never going to see him again. I'm never going to see him again. He's lost forever. I don't understand. And God just saying, you're not going to, I can't explain this all to you right now. You're not going to understand it. But David rests with me. It's all going to be okay. And kind of taking a deep breath and accepting that and realizing that my job is to accept God's faithfulness and God's love.
Right.
And trust that he's okay. I remember at David's funeral, my dad spoke and he said, God did not drive the car that killed David. This was not what God wanted for us. He said, but God was there to rescue him, and God rejoiced when David entered into his presence in heaven. And you're like, wow. That's the kind of God we serve.
Yeah.
So he's trustworthy. I don't get it. I don't have to get it.
No, we don't. There are some things that are just beyond our ability to understand. And we have finite minds, and there are some things that are beyond our limited abilities. And that's why it's called faith.
Yes.
Wouldn't require faith if you could see it and if you had all the answers.
Right.
When you look back at these past 9.5 years, Diane, even though we don't give advice, we're not in the business of giving advice on this podcast because everybody's grief journey is unique. We do share a lot of things in common, that's for sure. But one thing I would like for you just to offer to our listeners in terms of things that you found beneficial and helpful sources of hope and support and encouragement along the way over these past years. What did those things look like for you? I mean, what forms did they come in, whether it was books or radio programs or?
Yes. There are a lot of different things. I think immediately what was helpful for us is we went down to Baylor. See, David was killed on a Thursday and we went to Baylor, I think it was on a Tuesday, and they held a memorial service there. And I mean, oh my goodness, day and night compared to the church, how they treated us. they honored his life. They recognized his value. I remember David played trumpet in marching band, the trumpet studio, and it's an amazing trumpet studio. They played at his funeral. The marching band director spoke at his funeral. The assistant spoke. They were just so kind and welcoming. We've made such good friends by this connection. The parent network coordinator was brand new in her job. She didn't want to deal with us because she was scared, and she said God told her do what she's told and help. And she's become such a dear friend to us. It was like the people there were so willing to do the right thing and to honor David and to honor God and honor God's life that was lived through David. We met as friends. They were like 19 years old, and these guys were amazing. They were kind. They talked to us. They shared stories. David was living in the honors college. They had a big event where they shared stories about David. That was an incredibly healing time. And so what I learned through that is find your people, find the people who will say those things to you, who will support you. We were so fortunate because it became a really large group down at Baylor, and we've kept in touch with his girlfriend and his friends and a number of professors. The marching band director is a good friend. We were really, really fortunate to get that level of support. But find your people, even if it's just a couple of people, they will speak life into you. I did read a lot of books. Reading the one by Walter Storff. Have you read that? It'll Come to Me.
Oh, gosh, no.
And Lament for a Son.
Oh, yeah.
It's really, really a difficult read. It's not very long, but it's so painful, but it really supports you in your grief. It lets you know you're normal, and it just honors the life of your child. I mean, you're grieving somebody that mattered very deeply to you, and he really honors that. That was helpful. I'm the daughter of Bible teachers, so I started reading some theology because I felt like if my son lives with God, I want to know who God is a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful to me, just to start to understand in my little way, what is God doing? What is he saying? I so wanted to know what God was saying to me. And I guess I'm not done with that journey, but I guess the answer was redeeming the world.
Yes. And I don't know about you, Diane, but we craved any kind of information that we could read about heaven because Ryan was a believer like David. And so we knew that he was with the Lord. And we know what the Bible says about heaven, but it's not all that much in detail. And so we just craved anything that we could find, could get our hands on, that would tell us a little bit more about what life was like where Ryan is now. And I remember we read a book called The Real Heaven by Chip Ingram. It's not a long read, but man, it just spoke volumes to us. I appreciate you sharing that. Compared to 9.5 or 10 years ago, there are a number of resources available now to grieving parents that we didn't have. There are a number of podcasts now for grieving parents. I've had multiple guests who have written books after the death of their child. So it just speaks to how God can take something so tragic, so traumatic, so painful, and redeem it for good.
Right.
Both in our lives and in the lives of other people. And it doesn't mean that you have to write a book, doesn't mean you have to start a podcast, doesn't mean you have to start a ministry. But I think what you would say, I think, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I think when we start reaching out to others who have gone through similar trauma and suffering and pain, God uses that to help heal us because we're expressing it, number one. When we share it, we connect with other people at a heart level. It's far more impactful than just reading information about grief. When we share our stories, and I think that's important, no matter what the platform is, whether it's just one-on-one, whether it's in a group, in your church, whatever that looks like, on a podcast like what you're doing right now. I think when we share our stories, it really connects with other people. And then it's like it gives them permission to talk about it. Whereas prior to that, maybe they were too afraid to do it. They were afraid that people would not listen or that people wouldn't be interested, whatever the reason. But I think it gives them permission to know that they can do that too. And it honors our children in the process.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, Diane, I just appreciate so much your willingness to give us some glimpses into your grief journey. I appreciate you sharing with our listeners about your sweet boy, David, and the impact that he had on so many lives. And I know that as people listen to this conversation, that they're going to find hope and they're going to find encouragement listening to what you have shared today. So thank you so much for doing that and for being our guest.
Thank you for having me.
The privilege has been all mine. And if you're listening today and Diane's story touched you and you would like to share that with us, there is a link. You'll find a link in Diane's episode description. If you'll just simply click that and leave a message, we'd love to hear from our listeners. And if that's the case, I'll certainly share that with Diane. But thank you guys for listening today, and we will look forward to having you back in 2 weeks. Well, thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this episode encouraging and helpful. If you did, would you mind taking just 1 minute to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts by clicking the link provided in each episode description, and then sharing with someone you know? And as always, thank you for listening.